Good morning. We were standing back there and we were discussing, holy moly, how do you go from the story of life to process for profit? It's a little harsh reality here. So as a director of director of delivery for Huge, what I do is I look at the enterprise and how we work, how we deliver product projects. It's been my experience that every company I've interacted with, small, big, doesn't matter, everyone's got process problems. How we deliver gets in the way sometimes. And it became really interesting to me. So the talk today is about my initial thoughts on some of the challenges, a lot of the things we've been talking about the past couple of days. We had great conversations, and I've summed them up a little bit. I also want to talk about the opportunities in front of us to try to take care and to take advantage of the new industries and the spaces that we might want to move into. But the fact is you can't really do that unless you tune your process and try to grow your company. So I have some thoughts around that, and I'm going to give you one thing that you can take away from here with you and start tonight, tomorrow, whenever, with your team to try to improve how you work so that you can grow. The essence of this talk essentially is, how do we make more money out of the same work? Right? How do we improve our margins? Because if I improve my margins, I can grow. If I can grow, I can do different things. I can have bigger accounts. I can take on more people, etc. I want to start with a little story. A couple of months ago, I went up to Covington, Kentucky. I do a lot of woodworking. The gentleman that's actually sawing right now, his name is Christian Bexford. He's known as the shaker guy. He restores shaker furniture, he builds shaker furniture and all that. And as I'm standing there looking at him smugly, clearly, judging, I was looking at his technique and everything, and I said to him, I said, Chris, I've used that saw before, and I found it hard to use. And I use this other saw now. And he stopped me and looked at me and said, I've used the saw you use, but the fact is that with this saw, I can cut a dovetail in 2 less strokes. I thought to myself, 2 strokes, what's the big deal? He said, when you build a piece of furniture and it has 400 dovetails, to me, that's 800 less strokes that I have to take in order for me to finish my work. I want to finish that piece of furniture, and I want it out of my shop so I can get paid. And it dawned on me, we do the same thing. This is what we need to be doing. How can we do our work, get it out of the shop so we can get paid without putting as much effort? And it was a real aha moment for me because he works on his own. He could take his time if he wants, but he needs to make money. He needs to survive, and the way he does it is through process optimization. It doesn't matter the industry you're in. You could be in an agency, you could be car manufacturing, whatever it is. If you don't take care of process optimizations, you're going to have a tough time. Let's talk a little about the challenge. So these are some of the conversations that we had over the past couple of days, repeating it over and over. Every single one of us knows how to build a site. In fact, because we have that expertise, we can repeat that process over and over and over. The problem is that's being commoditized. We have a ton of shops coming into our area. Shops with just like 2 people who want to rebuild a whole site and do a whole site redesign. $5,000. Sure, I can do it. But how do you compete with that? The other problem is we've got small and foreign shops that can deliver faster and cheaper. They can throw a ton of bodies at it. But we also have a need to look at a new business model. Every time the industry changes, we have to be able to adapt to it. If we don't have a process in place, we try to reinvent everything over and over again. In order for you to be able to compete, look at AI, look at mobile. Changing your business model is super tough. And if you don't have the underpinnings to do it well, you may trip all over yourselves. So what do? Some of these things are probably okay. Sometimes we want to invest into a client. That's how we compete. We think that if we invest into this client by reducing our price, we will get more work. Maybe that's fine, maybe that's not, but it depends. Sometimes we just start adding scope. Anybody know what the golden triangle is? What are the three? Scope, time, money. The rule is you can only break 2 out of the 3. What we try to do is we try to break all 3 at the same time. Come on. And then we work harder. The reason why we deliver today is because our teams really give a crap. We hire people that really care about the business. They're really passionate. They bust their butts to get stuff out there. In fact, I would say we deliver in spite of ourselves. We deliver because people care, not because we're necessarily good at it. The side effects of what we do sometimes is we end up with a lack of process. We recreate the process every single time we have a new project. So how many times you step it up as a client project, you look at it a month later and you go, why aren't we still on the tracks and moving? Well, nobody was really leading it, but this person is now taking care of it. But wait a minute, we just delivered this other project that looks like this one, but we're still suffering through it. Why? The next thing is we can't repeat the success. It works once, then we do it again, and then we instantly fail because we never wrote it down. And then, when push comes to shove, the loudest voice is always going to win, not the right thing. Somebody's sitting on a project, you have an emergency, guess what? Somebody's going to step up, take over, and do what they need to do to get it done. That's not necessarily a healthy thing. And we end up with missed promises. We end up with an unhappy client. And because the client is unhappy, we have to speed things up. That leads to lost revenue because now we just threw a bunch of resources on the project so that we can speed it up and get it out the door so that we don't lose the client. But most importantly, we have a culture collapse. The hero culture thrives. I'm here to tell you, stop the hero culture now. It's not okay for somebody to step up and be the hero at the last minute. That means you did something wrong. You're putting that person in a position of risk. You're putting your business in a position of risk. That's not okay. It's better to have the team step up. It's better to be anticipating what's happening than to have a hero culture. Your morale drops, people leave, you have to train new people. Your culture just goes all over the place. Oops. So you fight yourselves, not the competition. I want to talk about 3 areas real quick. I know that, I can include probably China, South America in this, but let's talk about these 3 for now. They're the main ones that we tend to come against right now. And if you think about India, because of their super low wage cost, they can throw a lot of bodies at a project, a ton. And even though they might have an inefficient process, communication's hard, the time zone is awful, right? Doesn't matter. They have so many people on it, they can keep up, and they can keep fixing it until you have what you need. Now, Eastern Europe, they're a sharp bunch of guys. They've got process super down tight. I've worked with some of them. I can't believe it. They're amazing. Engineering-wise, they're amazing. Here, what we have big advantages that we understand the markets. Typically, you won't see new markets necessarily come out of India and Europe. We do it. It's in our land. We understand the culture. We understand the market. We understand creative, UX. We have the advantage that we are here next to the client. So harness that. The weakness in each region, obviously besides time zones, it requires high hands-on management. In Eastern Europe, I have yet to see them really connect UX and creative with the tech, do like a whole end-to-end design. Our problem is that we have a lot of waste in our system. The process is not optimized. It's funny, and I believe it's a cultural thing. If you think about our culture, we are a culture of spending money, buying things, turning it over, IKEA furniture, whatever it is. We treat that and we behave the same way as we do in our business. We think we're efficient, we're really not. So I invite you to care more about process. And I can tell you that if you don't, the business will slowly die for it. In the absence of process, people tend to create their own to make their lives easier. I had a developer who was under a deadline, discovered that there was a bug on a production system for a pretty big client. And he decided to fix the bug on his own at midnight and did a release to production at midnight on his own. Side effect, the team had to wake up and be up till 3 o'clock in the morning trying to fix this thing on a live production e-commerce site. Seriously. Like, people don't necessarily think this hero culture, this thing about, oh, I got to solve this because I want to do the right thing. If you don't instill the right philosophy, you're going to trip all over yourselves. It's not a good thing. Look at this metric. McKinsey Oxford did this study, trying to figure out how to manage IT projects and where the waste was so that they could improve it. 66% average cost overrun. On a $200,000 project, that's $132,000 cost overrun. Think about that for a minute. We were talking yesterday about, give 3 proposals. Give 3 proposals plus 66% overrun just in case. I mean, you can't do that. This is another number that would apply to any of you. 17% of projects are so bad, they threaten the existence of the company. If you have 20 projects right now in your company, there are 3, on average, that could wipe you out if you're not careful. How does that sit? Give yourself an opportunity for a fighting chance, people. So, I'm going to state the obvious for a few slides here. To beat the pressure of the market you're in, look for the opportunity to pivot out, if you want to, or do something a little bit better within that market. To expand your markets, first you must grow the business with the people you have. Yeah, duh. To grow the business, you have to improve your margins. To improve your margins, focus on removing the waste. What I mean by removing the waste, it means that where are the places in your business where you spend time waiting for things to happen? I'm going to show you later. There's a concept of we do work, we wait. We do work, we wait. When we do work, we provide value. When we wait, it's waste. You can't move 100% of the waste, but you can certainly look at it and see if you can reduce it. To remove the waste, you optimize your organizational efficiency, process improvement. Process optimization for better ROI is 100% under your control. Think about that. Is there anything else in your business, besides improving how you work, that you have 100% under your control? Can't control your client. Can't control the market. Can't control politics. Can't control people who come and go from your office, who applies, who does a good job, who writes good code. That is the one thing where you can say, no, I want to do this differently, and I can do something about it. So this is the big idea for today. How you deliver is the most important factor in the success of what you deliver. You can put whatever you want out there. But if you don't know how to deliver it, your client suffers for it, they won't come back, your team suffers for it, they'll leave, you suffer for it. So let's look at the opportunities. Timeline of where we think we might be in the next 5 years. Of course, everything is changeable. Think about it right now. Site redesign a few years ago was perhaps more in the trending. Now we're on commoditized. Digital transformation, e-commerce, all that is starting to trend towards commoditized. Mobile and IoT, of all things, are trending, but that's going to start moving over slowly. So where do you want to be in the next 5 years? What are the things that are really interesting to you? It might be something outside this realm of fields. Then think about 2 things. When you make a change, is this change an internal change or an external change? If it's an external change, how do I want it to affect the client? If it's an internal change, how do I want to affect employees? So here are some ideas that you could write down and say, okay, for example, experience design, tech strategy, process and delivery frameworks, and invest in knowledge. These are the things that you might want to prioritize. Anything at the top middle of this graph is going to be where you want to focus, because that's going to have the highest impact externally and internally. Some other things that you might consider, for example, we do hackathons. Hackathons are cool. They get you to learn new things. You could sometimes bring your client in and work with your client to do something different. But the impact is not as big as you think. It's informative. It gets you to experiment. It might help you pivot to a different type of work. But it's something to consider. It's not the first thing you should be doing. Everything that I do when I try to think about optimization, I think in lean terms. Okay? And lean always tells you optimize the whole. What I mean by optimize the whole is you start with yourselves. The execs, to me, are at the top of the chain and the only ones that can actually make the biggest impact that affects the whole organization on straight down. Look at everything. How do you write your RFPs? How do you write your SOWs? I had a conversation with Gabe last night. Sometimes we write SOWs and we put ourselves in a corner. We make promises in the SOW that put our teams in a bad position. Unintentionally. We do it because either we don't know how to write them or we're not sure what the consequences are of the words that we put in this SOW, and then we find ourselves behind the 8 ball. How do you take process intake? Like, how do you get new work? How long does it take to get new work? Has anybody ever analyzed in your company whether you should be spending X amount of time on an incoming work that might be, I don't know, $500,000? If you're spending, let's say, 3 months on $500,000, another project comes in and you only spent 1 month on it, and it brings you $1 million. Suddenly, something that's a little bit smaller, you might want to start evaluating. Is this something we spend that much time on, or do I spend my time pivoting to something else? The intake is just as important. And go on straight down. How does creative work? What do they do? How do we feed them to work? Content delivery, tech, releases, builds, DevOps, everything. Look at it. What you want to do is you want to increase your feedback loop. If you think, most of you are probably familiar with Scrum, so if you think about a Scrum team, sometimes we say, okay, we have 2 weeks sprint, 2-week sprint, 3-week sprints. Well, that's great. So let's say I have a 2-week sprint. I can't get feedback until after I'm done with a 2-week sprint to figure out if I did okay or not. I wasted 2 weeks having no information on whether I did something wrong. Sometimes people say, hey, I want to go 3 weeks. Sure, go to 4 weeks if you want. You're just going slower. Speed up that feedback loop, whatever it is. If you're doing designs and your design team is not talking to your tech team while they're doing the designs, you're wasting an opportunity. How many times has a design team presenting something to technology, and tech looks at it and says, I can't do this in this amount of time, or this is impossible to do. But the designer spent 2 weeks on it, coming up with the most awesome idea that can't be implemented. But if you check in every couple days, then the designer is pivoting with you. You're wasting a lot less time, but you're getting a much faster feedback loop and getting just the right thing. Include your client in this too. And I'm here to tell you that your team is not the problem. Stop focusing on your team first. If you start with yourselves, if you start with your execs, with your engagement folks, the people who are actually driving all the accounts on down, your team is the last people you need to worry about. You want to talk about empathizing? These are the folks who are on the ground getting beat up constantly for you, and yet when we bring in consultants to try to help us, we go to the team first, as if there's something wrong with them. They're organized the way they see that they need to be organized. They're doing what they need to do to deliver for you, but if you help them from the top, chances are they're going to reorganize on their own. You won't have to do much to help them out. There's a term we love to use in Atlanta, and it's called Ruthless Prioritization. TM there, don't copy it. And what we mean by that is that we ask why to everything, and do we really need it? And we ask that of ourselves, we ask that of our client, we ask that of the execs. Why are we doing it? Is it absolutely necessary? Thing is, when client comes to us, generally, they come to us because they need help, because they don't know how to do it. Has anybody ever had a client that came to them that knew exactly what they were doing? Yeah, not one hand. They need our help. So if we don't take the responsibility to tell them, no, you should not be doing this, and here's why, guess what we're doing? We're wasting time. We're wasting their time. We're increasing scope. We're taking on more work for no good reason. Yes? It's just an example of the image. But if you have user value in one, I would say probably impact would be the other as I would use, right? You could have anything in that quadrant that makes sense, right? But in this case, user value, impact, yes, do that, right? But prioritize it however you want to prioritize. But the point is to question everything. It's okay to question everything. I want you to question everything because that's how you learn. That's how you remove the waste from the system. And for the love of God, please write it down. Your process must be repeatable by anyone who starts working for you. It doesn't have to be pages and pages and pages of stuff. In fact, my process is 2 pages. It has one graph that shows what we do at different steps, another graph that shows what the particular discipline does. That's it, so that they understand how to work. And it also must be sustainable. If the team has to work really hard at one point and not at all at the other point and keep going up and down like that, you're going to burn them out. Make sure it's sustainable. Do what you think you can sustain. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I want to tell you that change starts with you. And I'm going to give you the one thing that you can do when you come out of here to consider doing in your business that I think will make you a better company. First thing is start with what you know. Don't change any process. Okay? The reason why I went away from large company agile transformations and all that is because we always try to change the whole thing. Fact is, your company works. You've been in business for years and years and been successful. Why would you go in and upend the whole thing? Makes no sense. Write down how you work now at every stage. How do you do development? How do you do design? Content, creative, contracts. Write it down. What are the steps? Create a value stream analysis of the whole company processes. Who knows what a value stream analysis is? Raise your hand, please. Okay, just a couple of people. So I'm going to show you what that is. This is an example of a value stream analysis. It's not ours. I just pulled this off randomly from the net, but it's a true fact of what happens. So if you look at the image, it gives you the steps that you do. You do feature requests, analysis, approval, definition, design, code, test, validation, deploy. Kind of looks like a normal process that people use. The green part is where you're actually doing work. The red part is the waste. Look at the testing, validation, and deploy area. In this case, got 10 days of wait. Why? You don't have to change the process. You don't have to change how you work. Chances are what you have to do in this area, change your deployment process. Automate it. Do something, right? Reduce that from 10 days to 1 day. Chances are, if you write down your process, and that's happened with every single team that I've worked with, you will find an impossible amount of waste. Your mind will be blown. You'll look at it and say, how is this even possible? As a business owner, how did I not know this? In this case, look at this example. 53% of the time, 36 days doing nothing. 19 days, we do work. What value is that? By identifying and removing the waste, you automatically produce more work with the same team. I'm going to show you some metrics that are going to make you probably jump back a little bit because I do this all the time, and I've tracked metrics at Huge to know exactly how much change I effect on a team when I start working with it. And please stop fretting about frameworks. I don't care if you want to use Agile. I don't care if you want to use Kanban. I don't care if you want to use Waterfall. I don't care. When I was at Process Camp, I was asked, what's your favorite process? My answer was, you remember? The one that works. Do you have to borrow from those processes? Of course you should. Don't reinvent the wheel. But if you understand what your flow is, then you understand how to adapt some of these frameworks, or maybe the pieces of the framework, in order to execute better. So if you think about Scrum, most of you probably do Scrum. Did you know user stories are not part of Scrum? User stories is part of XP, which is another Agile method. And yet we say it's Scrum. It's not. Some people do Kanban. We do Kanban all the time now. And yet I have my daily stand-up. Does that make me Scrumban? No. That just makes me Kanban with a daily stand-up. Right? Who cares? Do what's right. And keep worrying about the waste. Be vigilant about the waste. This slide is probably going to cause me some designers to come jump at me because there's so many words on there. Committed design suicide here. But I wanted to give you something when this is distributed so that at least you can start thinking about it. Start with your team blockers at different levels. Be careful with what the promises that you're making for them. That's one of the things. Don't put them behind the 8 ball. After that, look at infrastructure problems. Look at your external dependencies. I can't tell you how many projects, when you start getting bigger and bigger, start having third parties working with you. Sometimes you can't control them. They have their own mess. They have their own waste. What are the techniques that you can use to shield yourself from it? That removes a lot of waste. Scope control. It's okay to say no. I bet the client or anybody's not going to be mad at you because you said no for a good reason. Don't say no just because you feel like it. Ruthless prioritization, release fast. Total and transparent everywhere. I let my clients see everything in our planning board. Everything. I give them read access, they can make comments, they can do whatever they want. I have nothing to hide. If they want to ask questions, they want to look at the metrics, they can look at the metrics. And that's the other thing. Metrics, metrics, metrics. When you do your analysis and you figure out where your waste is, start timing things. Take metrics. What is your throughput? How fast are you going? What is your cycle time? What is the lead time? These are 3 things that are super important for you to understand how you're improving, so that you can project when you're going to deliver. And then where do you want to focus? What work is interesting to you? Is there a clear vision and plan? And if so, did you write it down? Does your company know about it? Do your employees know about it? Do you have a roadmap? How many projects actually have a roadmap? And not only that, how many projects actually have a rolling roadmap, meaning that you have a roadmap that might have 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And are you reviewing that roadmap every 3 months, or are you just going blindly into the abyss? Think about those things. Removing the waste will speed you up. By how much? So, I can engage a team at a client's because I also work on the client side. I try to help our clients get their process better. Once we sit down, we do this value flow analysis and we look at it. Within the first month, I can improve the team's performance by 40%. Think about that for a minute. That means that you need 60% of the original team size to do the same work. Who doesn't think that's enough of an impact? That's a 40% increase in speed to market. You want to talk about a faster feedback loop? That's almost twice as fast in a month. Because you remove the waste, because you understand your system now, you figure out, hey, why are we wasting time on this? Let's take this stuff out. It doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't. Leaner teams lead to lower cost projects and higher margins. That's the key. You don't have to employ as many people on a particular project in order to deliver the same. Or you could use the same size team you're using now and give your client 40% more work. Now you can compete. Now, all these things that these small shops and foreign shops had as an advantage start falling by the wayside, because now your value proposition is not only I'm here next to you, I understand creative UX, I understand the market, but what? I kick ass, and I can deliver for you really fast, and I'm going to engage you in it, I'm going to show you my process, and I'm going to show you how great it is. That's a value proposition to your client. There's one warning. Too much process will kill creativity, and it happened to me. As I was working at Huge, and I was trying to improve the process over and over, I was so focused on getting it super optimized, personal pride, that a creative director came up to me and said, Robert, my team is so lean right now that we're having to work entirely too fast to try to be creative. The work is not coming out like we want. You have to be careful with that. And I immediately sat down with him and said, great, where did we go too far? Let's talk about this. Engage your teams to roll back a little bit. Engage your teams to remove and to roll back. If you go too far, it can be really shackling. So 3 things. Repeatable, sustainable, efficient process. Ruthless focus on prioritization. And reimagine the business model. What is it that you want to do? I'm going to leave you with one last thought, which is there's a growing opportunity to do something big. You have everything you need. Just do it with less saw strokes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert. We do have some time for Q&A. Are you up for that?
Yeah, sure.
Sounds good. Where do we leave the catch box? There it is. Who's got a question for Robert? Pavel?
I love that.
Sorry, Mark. It was too easy of a hand. We had to throw it first.
Okay, I think. Yeah, you mentioned that in one of company where you just came, I think it's a customer one, you improved for 40% efficiency. Could you maybe tell a little bit more what exactly you did there?
So when we engaged that team, there was a few things. I mean, I believe at the time they were working in Scrum. They had, they were testing with the team in India, and there were a couple of levels of how they were building the application before it went out. But nobody really understood why everything took so long. So we sat down and we had the team draw out the whole flow from the moment that a feature comes in to the moment that it gets to production. The first thing that we noticed is that no one on the team, or even outside the team, really understood how that worked. And this wasn't a small company. No one knew how the story got generated in the first place, how it got handed to the team. The team knew that little piece where, okay, I write some code, and then it gets tested by somebody out in India, and then it comes back to me, and then we do some kind of integration testing. I don't know what happens downstream. Once we wrote it all out, then we said, all right, let's write down how long it takes between each one of these steps. When we added it all up, for one story to make it from I'm in the backlog to I'm out on production, there were 9 to 12 weeks of waste. Stories just sat there because of different reasons. So we started looking at where the biggest culprits were, and in this case, it was the fact that because they were working with a QA team in India, the round trip between local and India and then back for feedback was as high as 72 hours. We said, all right, how do we speed that up? So we tried to integrate India to talk in the morning and all that, improved a little bit. Then we said, no, put a QA on the team. Put a QA on the team, that was down to half an hour. It went from 72 hours to half an hour. That's the first big bump. The second one was the build process. The build process was just not very efficient. We talked about that, we improved it. That team now went from deploying, I think it was like every month, month and a half, to 2 to 3 times a week. Right? So now I'm getting much, much, much faster feedback. Because I'm getting this faster feedback, the developer is able to work faster. They're able to, if you find a bug, I can fix the bug. I don't have to pick up another story, right? Start working on it, and then 72 hours later, I get something from the QA that says, hey, this is broken. Now the developer has to stop, has to context switch, fix that thing to clear the line, and then go back to the thing that they were working on. Just doing these little things improved it. And we've improved it even more now, because now we understand how there's intake. So when the story comes in, now we implemented something called opportunity briefs. Like, what is the thing we want to work on? Management creates that. The team looks at it and says, okay, to solve your problem, here's what we believe you should be doing. There is a conversation now. Now we work on the exact thing that we need to work on. That team is pretty efficient now. It's one of the best running teams. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. In your experience, what are the most common inefficiencies that you see when you first start working with a new team? Like, what are the first things that you look for? Like, I know that's where I'm going to start.
Yeah.
What would those be?
Okay. The first thing that pops in my mind is there's not one central person who is responsible for the project, and it's not your project manager. We tend to put a lot of things on the project manager, but project manager is all over the place. Yes, they understand the project, they understand the client, they understand timeline and money and all that. They're not your expert. So the thing I ask is, who is your product manager? If you are building a product, I'm not talking about media projects necessarily, I'm talking about product projects. Who is the product manager? Who's the person that's the central person? The second thing is, there's never good tracking of metrics, right? So one thing that most teams that I've seen suffer from is, how many of you are running sprints and Scrum and all that? Can I see a quick show of hands? Okay. So tell me if this sounds familiar. You plan your sprint, you've got, 40 points. You get to the end, QA is not quite done, but you did 30 points. So okay, you have the 30 points. Next sprint, you move 10 points forward, and then you plan another 30 on top. Another 40 on top. Now you have 50. And that thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're not following metrics. When the metrics are telling us you can only do this much work, we keep saying, okay, but I only finished this much, so I'm going to do this much plus this much to catch up. No, you're just not going fast enough, so stop planning that way. You've got to stick to your metrics. And I would say probably the third thing is, I'm going to talk from a tech standpoint, because create is a little bit different, because ideating through things is very different than just kind of writing code. The thing that I see developers do a lot is, because in such a hurry, they'll write code, and I used to be a developer, I'm guilty as charged, and when they're done, just throw it over the wall. QA gets it, and they find a ton of stuff, and it's sloppy stuff. It's not even good stuff. So now QA is thrashing, and that story has to bounce back. Now developer has to work on 2 stories, and et cetera. So what we've done, we've implemented something I learned at ThoughtWorks called desk check. Essentially, I work on my story. When I'm done, I tell the product manager, QA person, designer, come look over my shoulder. I sit down and take a look at it. I do a little demo for them of the story that I wrote. They make the comments right there, and we fix them. By the time it gets to QA, I'm not finding things like, hey, the font's wrong, or it's off by a pixel, or something like that. QA is actually spending time in the right places. So these would be probably the 3 things that I noticed the most.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ready?
This is a tough one, and maybe there's not an answer, but do you have any recommendations for what you do when the delay and waste is on the client side?
Yes, absolutely. We deal with that all the time. So a simple thing you can do is when you do a project kickoff, bring the client in and explain to them your process. And what I do is I tell them, look, when we get to these different stages, we're going to ask you for feedback, because typically that's where the client blockers are, right? You give them a design, and then you're just waiting for them. In the meantime, your team is, hopefully not twiddling their thumbs, but they're waiting for the answer. And what I tell them is, the longer you wait to give me an answer, the less I can do at the end, because you're dragging my team with you. And hence, the longer you wait, the higher your risk. The higher your risk, the less you get delivered. So the faster you give me feedback, and I'm going to be responsible for giving you the information as quick as I can so we can iterate over it together, the faster we can get through things and get the right thing for you, the faster I can do for you, and you have a chance of getting more than you were expecting. right? I want the client to own it as much as I do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. Anyone else? Back of the room or this way or? Watch it.
The most important metrics in your experience?
So, honestly, I care about two. I care about cycle time. I care about the number of cards that a team can actually get done within a week. That's really the throughput, right? I want to know what is the throughput of my team. One thing I've moved away from is asking my team to do estimation on stories. When they give you it's a 1, a 2, a 3, Fibonacci sequence, let's do estimation. I just tossed it out. I prefer the technical lead, look at the stories, and then make sure that they're not too big because we can't execute them, and let the team work on it. I want to know, in true fashion, how fast is the team going? That's the one. The second one is something I use in an application called LeanKit, and it's called the flow. What I want to know is the calculation of backlog growth against lead time and when I'm going to land and where I want to land. So what that does, it gives me a projection that says, based on the backlog you have now and the number of stories you're adding to your backlog, 3 months from now, I predict the trend is going to be X number of cars. So let's say it adds 200 cars 3 months from now. At the speed, at the throughput that your team is going right now, chances are you're going to hit it or you're going to miss it. That's what I need to know. So that's for project metrics. When you're doing the value flow analysis, I just want to know how much time. What is the cycle time, or more precisely, the process cycle time, meaning that between each step, how long am I taking? When we looked at the slide earlier, and it said underneath, you work for a day, you wait 6 days, work for a day, wait 6 days. That's the process cycle time. How long is it taken to do each step? That's the thing that I want to know when I really want to tune things up to figure out where the waste is and remove that. I don't think it should be more complicated than that, honestly.
Thank you.
Sure.
When you talk about the team's not estimating, your architect is still putting some value to the cards, right?
So the architect is not putting a value to the card. What the architect is doing is looking at the card for sanity to make sure that that card is just not so big that it's going to take weeks to do. Right?
So how do you accurately predict your burn down if there's no estimate to cards?
Through the flow that I just described. Because how many cards am I finishing a week? Right? What's important is that we finish value. We want to work on the value, right? The number of points doesn't give you the value that you're delivering to the customer. The number of points just tells you the general velocity of the team, but that's really variable and it's really subjective.
So there's some rubrics to what a typical card size is then?
So in LeanKit, for example, it considers the card to be 1. Everything's a 1, doesn't matter. You finish the card, it's a point, you're done, right? So you get to the end of the week, if you're doing 10 cards a week and your backlog has 200 cards, easy, 200 divided by 10, I'm done. That's when I'll be done. If you have points, if you're trying to use points, and then a client comes to you and says, well, when will you be done? You have to now go and estimate the whole backlog. That is a huge exercise. If you have a big backlog on a big project, it's such a waste because a lot of these cards are misunderstood. So you look at the card and you're like, oh, I don't know, we haven't defined this yet. 13? I have no idea. So what is the value of that, and how do you know whether you predicted it correctly or not? I'd rather move the team away from that and give the client some sense of, look, based on what I have in the backlog and the speed that the team is going at, I'm going to deliver here. Now, the same problem exists. There could be some cards that might be split. At that point, all I have to do is look at the backlog growth and see how many times am I splitting a card. So is it 20% of the time? Great. So I take the backlog, increase it by 20%. Now I have an estimation.
All right, last question. Is this relative to a stage of a project? Are you doing this day one?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Cards are always in the backlog. We track everything. I tell my team, I don't care what you're working on. If it's work, if it's a task, if it's document, don't care. Put it in the backlog because it's work. You have to be able to visualize it, expose where everything is. And you can't really estimate a document, right? In fact, if you think for the folks that do estimation, you don't estimate bugs because you don't know what how big a bug is going to be. So what's the point? But you still have to account for that work. How do we account for that work? Well, we think it's a 1 point. Okay, so make everything 1 point. Keep it simple. It's estimation, it's not precision.
All right, we got time for one more. Somebody else? Oh, got Andrew over here.
I'll walk it over. There's a lot of coffee.
Hi. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Very thought-provoking. We work with a lot of mission-driven organizations, and the speed of change is slow. It makes it hard to be highly efficient.
Yep.
And so we've been experimenting with maybe like a sawtooth model that's like on and off, but concurrency challenges can be
Yes.
real across multiple project spaces. Do you have any thoughts about how to achieve efficiency gains in the context of concurrent project management?
Yeah, so the experience that I've had with that, and it's not, I'll be honest, it's not very deep, has told me that where you end up struggling is when you don't have enough of these concurrent projects that go on and off. So what ends up happening, if you can't have enough to like cycle on and off so that you're constantly working, what you could end up happening with is tons of work, then nothing, and tons of work, then nothing, or tons of work, a little bit, and so people end up being not billable, for example, right? I think it's a capacity issue. You have to try to get more of these projects in order to stabilize it, but that's the only thing I have to offer around that. I have to take a look at where the wait is, and I might even invite you to look at, if I have a wait time, can I do something else in order to pivot out and do other things to diversify? Right? Think about investing into a project, investing in new technology to try to learn something new. But that's all I have to offer. Sorry. Good?
All right, there we
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you again, Robert Sfeir.